Because when you mock somebody, who do you mock? Their ego. The spirit is beyond that. So as soon as his attention shifted from his ego, from his spirit to his ego, this thing opened up like a fountain of blood. And it sprayed everybody in the front row. And then he was such an expert that as soon as he recognized what had happened, he immediately let the ego go. And he shifted back into samadhi. And as soon as he did that, this thing stopped as quickly as it had opened, like a faucet. So that's the power of intent, but that intention has to not come from the ego. It has to come from the level of the spirit. It has to come from a place where you have totally and completely, unequivocally relinquished your need for approval. Because the spirit does not need approval. The ego only needs approval. So that was a very important point that Wayne was articulating about being independent of the opinion of others. You know, a couple of years ago, or recently when I was in Australia, I was giving a lecture at the Australian Royal Society, and suddenly somebody in the front row interrupted me, and he said, "This is a fraud, and this is this, and this is that." And I said, "Who are you, sir?" He says, "I'm the president of the Australian Society of Skeptics." I said, "I don't believe you." The spirit is beyond the ego, has to go there. And once we start glimpsing that, just once we start glimpsing that, we start to go beyond our ordinary states of consciousness. And what the great Vedantic tradition was saying was that these states of consciousness actually create a certain way that the nervous system functions. And in each state that the nervous system functions, it creates its own physiology and creates its own reality. So you begin to escape from so-called ordinary reality. The so-called ordinary reality, which of course Wayne has been referring to as the tribal mind. It's the motley group of sages and psychotics and geniuses who can escape that tribal mind. And that's happened throughout the ages. You have to escape that tribal mind. And once you escape that tribal mind, then you begin to see that there are states of consciousness which are beyond the ordinary waking and dreaming and sleeping.
This concludes Side B. Please fast forward to the end of the tape and go to the next cassette to continue the program.
The first stage of consciousness is deep sleep, where our nervous system is in a certain stage and we respond to stimuli, but in a very primitive way. But it's still a state of awareness. Deep sleep is a state of awareness because you can respond to a stimulus. The second state of consciousness is dreams, where you wake up from that deep sleep into a dream-like state. And you start having some experience in the dream. There's some repertoire of experience. And then when you wake up from the dream state into the third state, it's called the waking state, which is presumably, I hope, what we're in at the moment, at least. Okay? Now we look back on the dream and we think, oh, that was just a dream. It wasn't anything real. It was all in my head. And the Vedantist comes along and he says, so is this, all in your head. Okay? You think that there's an external world out there. It isn't. It's the projection of your own awareness. This so-called very physical world is the projection of your awareness in waking state of consciousness. And if you could wake up from this, then it would be as ephemeral, as transient, as temporal as the dream was when you were dreaming. But you woke up from the dream, and then you said, aha, that was a dream. You can wake up from this into the fourth state, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. And then you look back at this and say, aha, waking state, how interesting. Now, people have experienced that now and then in the so-called near-death experience. And, I mentioned this patient of mine that I had many years ago, that one day he was repairing an antenna on the roof of a neighbor, and he touched a wire that he thought was dead, but it had 12,000 volts of electricity in it. So he got electrocuted. The current went through his body, went through his heart, caused ventricular fibrillation, and he died. That's the mechanism of death in electrocution. He fell from the roof 15 feet below to the ground. That's it. But as his luck would have it, he fell at the precise angle, the precise location, the precise amount of impact to defibrillate him. So when I met him, I asked him, what happened, Bob? He said, God called me. Then he quickly changed his mind. And I asked him, what was it like? And he said, it was like waking up from a dream. My whole life flashed across the screen of my consciousness in a few microseconds. And then I went through this tunnel, and you've probably read all this stuff anyway now. There's so much literature. And then I was in the light. And then beyond the light, a new dimension of existence. Now, since this is many years ago, since then there's been a spate of literature about this experience. But all of the literature says the same thing. All of it. Doesn't matter whether it's coming from Hindu tradition or Christian tradition or Islamic tradition or Sufi tradition. It all says the same thing. A review of the life process as if it was a dream. The whole karma of a whole life kind of flashes across. Then a little travel, then the light, then a new dimension of existence. It is literally the experience of waking up. Gautama Buddha, who is the founder of Buddhism, on his deathbed, people got around him and they said, who are you? Are you the Messiah? He said, no. He said, are you a prophet? He said, no. He says, are you enlightened? He said, not really. The Buddha said this. He says, then who are you? He said, I'm waking up. I've just woken up from this dream that you call life. He said, this lifetime of ours is as transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of beings is like looking at the movements of a dance. A lifetime is like a flash of lightning across the sky, rushing by like a torrent down the steep mountain. But I'm now awake. Walt Whitman, in one of his poems, Having the Experience of Soul or Spirit, he says, I must not be awake, for everything looks to me as it never did before. Or else I'm awake for the first time, and all that was before was just a dream. So many people have had that without electrocution. It's the whole point. It's the whole point of transcendence, to go beyond, samadhi. That's what samadhi is. This is the fourth state of consciousness. This is the state where we are now going beyond the ego into that silent gap, and we're connecting with the cosmic mind. So what happens is synchronicity starts to happen. Why does synchronicity start to happen? Because we've introduced the intent in the field, in the conscious energy field. And it's part of the field. It reorients the field. Ask and you shall receive. The fourth state of consciousness. The fifth state of consciousness, which is beyond samadhi, is called cosmic consciousness. Cosmic consciousness, where the brain functions in a completely different way, where you have the simultaneity of being in this world and not of it. In the Gospel of John, he says, I'm in this world and not of it. And the favorite quote of Wayne's that I love to quote from the Gospel of John, he says, Christ says, the works that I do, they shall do also, and greater works than these shall they do. Is that the right quote? Even the least among you, greater works than these shall you do. That happens when you are simultaneously operating in both worlds, in the material world and in the spiritual world. That's called cosmic consciousness. It is to have the witness alive and awake in sleeping, dreaming, and wakefulness.